returns home to controversy. Waiting for him at the front doorsteps, the latest over contacts between his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Russian operatives.
In Manchester, citywide events planned around a bank holiday are going forward just days after the terror attack there. We'll have a live report.
And hundreds of passengers stranded when British Airways suspended flights out of London's two biggest airports. Wow. We'll go live to Heathrow for an update on that story. My goodness.
That couldn't be fun.
No, it does not look fun at all.
Welcome to our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Natalie Allen.
And I'm George Howell from CNN World Headquarters in Atlanta. Newsroom starts right now.
Our top story, U.S. President Donald Trump back at the White House after an 8-day trip to the Middle East and Europe. But while he was gone, the political firestorm back home over Russian meddling in the election grew even bigger.
To the heart of this latest controversy, it's the president's close advisor, his own son-in-law, Jared Kushner. You see the U.S. President Donald Trump there, video taken earlier as he returned to Washington. Reporters asked Mr. Trump about it, and as he walked to the White House with the First Lady.
Mr. President, is Jared trying to set up a back channel to the Russians?
Well, as you just saw, Mr. Trump would not answer. For the latest on what happens next, here's CNN's Ryan Nobles.
President Donald Trump is back in Washington after his lengthy trip abroad. And even though his team feels confident the trip was successful, he returns to plenty of controversy, including a number of issues involving his son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner. Kushner has yet to respond to reports that he attempted to set up a secret back-channel line of communication with the Russian government during the transition. Kushner's connections to the Kremlin through a variety of means continue to be a specific line of inquiry by investigators looking to Russia's attempt to intervene in the U.S. election. Despite these issues, a White House official says Kushner isn't going anywhere. He plans to just keep his head down and keep focused on his wide portfolio of responsibilities in the West Wing. Meanwhile, the White House is shaking things up, creating a war room designed to quickly rebut the attacks that pour out as a result of the ongoing Russian investigation. And the president's children are getting involved as well. Donald Jr. and Eric Trump, his wife Laura, spending the last few days in Washington, meeting with Trump-aligned groups in and outside of the White House, including the teams at the RNC and the PAC American Priorities, which supports the Trump administration. The goal of these meetings was to get all of these teams on the same page ahead of the 2018 midterm elections and the president's own re-election bid in 2020. Ryan Nobles, CNN, Washington.
Setting up the so-called war room that Ryan Nobles just mentioned is in its early stages. Possible members are White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus and Chief Strategist Steve Bannon. Corey Lewandowski and David Bossie are also mentioned. Neither of those two are currently in the Trump administration, but they are longtime Trump loyalists.
Top advisors to President Trump are brushing aside questions about Kushner and Russia. Here's how Mr. Trump's director of National Economic Council and his national security advisor responded to reporters on Saturday about it.
We're not going to comment on Jared. We're just not going to comment on him.
Generally speaking, General, would you be concerned if somebody on the National Security Council or in this administration were to seek a back-channel communication system with the Russian embassy and with the Kremlin? Would that generally concern you, not to even address Kushner specifically, but in general terms?
No. I mean, we have back-channel communications with a number of countries. So generally speaking, about back-channel communications, what that allows you to do is to communicate in a discreet manner. So it doesn't predispose you toward any sort of content of that conversation or anything. So, no, I would not be concerned about it.
CNN U.S. security analyst Juliette Kayyem elaborated on exactly what the word back channel, what a back channel is, and when and why it's used. She spoke earlier with my colleague Ana Cabrera. Let's listen.
Back channel is an authorized right, overture, so authorized by the president, so I do wonder if Trump authorized this, an authorized overture mostly to a third party to begin discussions about changing policy with another country. So the best example of a back channel is, for example, we wanted to start overtures with Cuba, the Obama administration. That's hard to do. There are laws against it. So you begin, you go to the Pope, actually. This is public knowledge now. The Pope then sort of creates a situation in which the two countries can speak as countries, not as a son-in-law, speak as countries and what their policies are to begin to change policy over time. So generally a back channel is authorized. It utilizes the United States apparatus. It doesn't go to the Russians or the Cubans, and it involves a third party. So I actually think, you remember today H.R. McMaster said, oh, back channels are happening all the time. He was being like too cute, you know, because of course back channels are happening all the time. This was not a back channel. This was a covert overture to avoid the U.S. apparatus.
So Juliette Kayyem there describing this as a way to begin discussions about changing a policy over time using U.S. apparatus. Claire Sebastian joining us now from Moscow. We'll get to that in a moment, Claire. But first, I want to ask you generally about this term back channel. There's obviously a great deal of shock by many here that such a thing was even proposed by an incoming administration through a Russian embassy of all places. But generally speaking, is this at all common for Russia to agree to a back channel with other nations or incoming administrations?
Well, I think just like the U.S., George, this is something that is done in kind of diplomatic circles. Certainly a seasoned diplomat like the Russian ambassador to the U.S., Sergei Kislyak, would have been well familiar with this kind of practice. But there are a couple of things that are very unusual here. One, that the suggestion by Jared Kushner was to set up a channel for incoming National Security Advisor Michael Flynn to speak to Russian military officials in Moscow. That was still while they were in the transition. They weren't even in power yet, and the U.S. had ongoing military personnel in Syria. So this would have raised serious questions about whether or not they were doing anything to undercut the policy of the current administration. That is not done by a transition team. And the second thing is not so much the principle, but the method, using the kind of the technical equipment in the Russian embassy in Washington would be seen to be extremely unusual. Certainly, the Washington Post reported that Sergei Kislyak was said to be taken aback by this, and I think that really relates more to the method that was suggested for this back channel than the principle of that, George. The
storyline itself quite controversial. Important to point out that we have not yet heard Jared Kushner's side of the story. He is not a suspect in any particular case yet, just a person of scrutiny by the FBI at this point. Here's the question. The U.S. president had clearly campaigned on the hope of improving relations with Russia, and Russia hoping to see the lifting of sanctions on that end. But more to the point here, Claire, as the reality of these investigations, as all the questions continue to harden, what is the view from Russia about that possibility?
Well, there's kind of two aspects to this, George. On the one hand, the Russian government is extremely frustrated at all the kind of Russia-related controversy that's coming out of Washington. We saw that in the reaction that we got yesterday, a very curt response from the foreign ministry to the Washington Post report originally about Jared Kushner's suggestion of this secret back channel. The foreign ministry spokeswoman telling us this was, quote, McCarthyism or simply internal political squabbles. McCarthyism suggesting that they are concerned here that the whole Russia issue is being used by Trump's opponents to try and discredit him. But the other side to this, George, is that they are worried in terms of policy. The kind of the reset that was promised by the many comments that Trump made on the campaign trail does not seem to be materializing. And I think they are looking for any clues, any kind of breadcrumbs coming out of the Trump administration as to how this policy develop. And comments like this from Gary Cohn on the foreign trip that the president just completed would be extremely concerning to Russia. Take a listen.
We're not lowering our sanctions on Russia. If anything, we would probably look to get tougher on Russia. So the president wants to continue to, keep the sanctions in place.
Sanctions a critical issue for Putin's Russia. It's stinging not only the economy, but the sense of national pride here. So that, capping the frustration over all the Russia-related reports coming out of Washington, this was really not very good news for Moscow, George.
It is a mix of messages. There was the photo taken with the president, Mr. Lavrov and Kislyak in the Oval Office, so that seemed to be a positive note for Russians, but at the same time, mixed messages coming from members close to the president. Claire Sebastian live for us in Moscow. Thank you for the reporting today. One place where President Trump did seem more comfortable was when he was addressing hundreds of U.S. troops and their families before returning to Washington. Take a look here, the scene at a naval air station in Sicily on the final stop of his overseas trip. Mr. Trump didn't mention the growing controversy at home over the alleged contacts between the campaign and Russia. Instead, he touted what he called the success of his trip and said that he had hit a home run.
I was here in Sicily to attend very important summit meetings, the meeting of the G7. It was a tremendously productive meeting where I strengthened America bonds. We have great bonds with other countries. And with some of our closest allies, we concluded a truly historic week for our country. The U.S. is currently paying much more than any other nation, and that is not fair to the United States or the United States taxpayer. So we're working on it, and I will tell you, a big difference over the last year. Money is actually starting to pour into NATO.
Well, we should find out in the coming days if the U.S. will pull out of the landmark Paris Climate Accord. President Trump tweeted Saturday he will make a decision about that next week. During the G7 summit in Sicily, world leaders pressed him on that issue. Mr. Trump, however, left the summit without directly reaffirming his commitment to the accord in the official dispatch from the G7, unlike the 6 other world leaders there, including German Chancellor Angela Merkel.
The entire discussion about climate was very difficult, if not to say very dissatisfying. We have a situation where 6, or if you also include the EU 7, are against 1. We didn't beat about the bush, but rather made it very clear that we 6 of the G7 member states, plus the EU, continue to support the targets. This Paris Climate Agreement is not just any old agreement, but rather a central agreement for the course of globalization.
Angela Merkel expressing her frustration there. Scott Lucas joins us now from Birmingham, England, as he often does. He's a professor of international politics at the University of Birmingham and the founder and editor of EA Worldview. Scott, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. And we were hearing from Angela Merkel there, and we know that President Trump didn't have much to say when the other leaders were talking about climate change. He, of course, has been a staunch opponent of believing in climate change. But let's start with the overall trip. We know this president gloats. He spins it as a huge success. But what was accomplished for him on the world stage, do you think?
I think in contrast to the lavish reception he received in Saudi Arabia, where he was on safer ground, and that went relatively well. And even the Israeli leg of the trip, the photo ops looked good, even if very little substance occurred. The European leg of Trump's trip did not go well. And indeed, beyond the controversy over the Trump-Russia investigation, it bodes very badly for U.S. relations. That is not only because of the division over climate change, which occurred yesterday, but before that, Trump's remarks to fellow NATO leaders were extremely disturbing, because while repeating the mantra, you must pay more, you must pay more, you must pay more, what he failed to do was reaffirm a commitment to collective self-defense, this Article 5. Now, this article has guided NATO through the Cold War and beyond, and Trump is the first leader not to give full backing to it. So not only are European leaders uneasy, I think what you're looking at is a realignment here. You're going to look at Angela Merkel working with people like France's President Emmanuel Macron and other European leaders to say, we can't count on the U.S. anymore to lead. We need to start making our own arrangements.
Well, and now he comes home to yet another questionable action regarding Russia, and this time it regards his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who Kushner has so many responsibilities in this administration, yet he has no government experience. He's really an unknown. Few have heard him even speak. This report about a back channel with Russia and what Jared was trying to do, do you chalk this up to inexperience, naivete, incompetence, or something else?
You know, if we were playing football, we just finished the warm-ups and we're getting into the real game, because Jared Kushner is not a naive individual. He's not inexperienced. He is, however, a businessman. And not only Kushner, but Trump have tried to deal with Russia as if this was a business transaction. Well, you can't do that when you're in government. There are protocols you have to follow. There's a foreign policy that has to be maintained. And the key here, following on for what your correspondent said, is if Kushner had done this, and if Michael Flynn, the National Security Advisor, had done this when Trump was inaugurated, they'd be okay. The government can do this. When you do this before you're inaugurated, without the knowledge of the Obama administration, you're undercutting U.S. foreign policy. That is an absolute no-no, and it does raise, as former CIA directors have mentioned, it raises questions about whether that political transgression is one that even goes further, that actually criminal activity took place. We'll have to wait and see.
There seem to be so many tentacles coming out of the Russia investigation. It's probably mind-numbing to some people trying to keep up with it. So what do you think will happen with Jared Kushner, meantime, as the administration looks to set up its war room now to deal with so much on their plate vis-a-vis Russia?
Well, let's get back to fundamentals. We've got an FBI investigation that Trump could not prevent despite his efforts. It's now expanding. We've got 2 congressional investigations. Those investigations have already led to the resignation of Michael Flynn, the National Security Advisor. But now you have gone close as you can get to Trump without reaching the president himself, by reaching Kushner. And here's the essential background. This is all in the context of Russian interference in 2016 to help Trump get elected. Did Kushner know about this? Did he make promises to the Russians, for example, that sanctions might be removed because Trump had been elected? If that connection is made, and I stress if, then that takes us not only into the football game, it takes us possibly into the 4th quarter and the possibility that Trump himself may be affected.
Scott Lucas. Scott, we appreciate your insights. Thank you.
It is interesting, though, Mr. Kushner, you don't really hear much from Mr. Kushner. You see him in the background with many photos, don't really hear much from him, but, he's agreed to, be very clear and transparent with Congress if questioned. Those statements would be scrutinized under oath, then compared to other statements. So you do see a White House now that will be under a great deal of pressure because the words will matter. The facts are quite stubborn here.
And it continues to get more complex.
Indeed. Still ahead here on Newsroom, Manchester refuses to be broken by terror. How the city is moving forward after the concert attack ahead.
Also, British Airways hoping to get back to business after a major computer outage strands thousands. We'll have a live report from Heathrow Airport. Coming up here, you're watching CNN Newsroom.
CNN's Mohammed Leela following this story live in Manchester this hour. Mohammed, there, if you could set the scene for us. We see the memorial that continues to grow behind you to honor and remember the people who were wounded, who were killed in this attack. But again, this is a city that continues to move forward.
Well, that's right. Moving forward is the exact correct description, George. This is a very important weekend in terms of things going on here in the city. There's the half marathon, there's a 10K run, there are some track and field events and some concerts. Now, all of those would draw people from around the region, in fact, possibly from around all of the UK. And there was a concern earlier this week that some of these events might not take place. But generally, the public rose up and expressed a demand for these things to take place as a way to show the UK and the rest of the world that Manchester is moving through this difficult phase. But I should point out that there are additional security personnel that are deployed here on the streets. There are armed police officers walking around patrolling the streets, something you don't see very regularly in the UK because we know that officers generally don't carry firearms.
So security, as you say, is tight. We see some of the images there beside you here on the screen. Also, the investigation continues. These searches are, continuing to occur. What more can you tell us about the investigation itself? Information about the bomb where that was assembled, Mohammed?
Well, George, the bomb police believe was assembled in a flat. They believe that they've identified a flat, which is an apartment that was being used by the suspect. And of course, that's going to be a very key part of the investigation. There would be forensic teams that would go there and try to uncover any evidence, any residue, any leftover materials that might have been there. And late last night, police also released the first security images of the suspect, Salman Abedi. They say the images were taken as he was on his way to the arena to carry out the plot. And some interesting numbers, George, in terms of the total investigation. British police have said that there are 1,000 people that have been assigned as part of this investigation. That means they have 1,000 people that are combing through leads and following the investigation and moving that investigation forward. So that gives you a sense of the scope of the number of people involved, and police believe they are getting closer to tracking down this network that they believe enabled him to carry out this plot in the first place.
9:24 in the morning there in Manchester, where Mohammed Leela is following the story. Mohammed, thank you. British Airways says that it's hoping to operate at near normal with a schedule on Sunday. This after this, a major computer outage. It grounded all the airline's flights at two of London's busiest airports. Natalie, I mean, just look at that. You just feel so bad for the folks there.
You know, some of us have been there in some ways, but yes, two airports. Thousands of travelers are still stranded after a power supply issue brought down the system at Heathrow and Gatwick Saturday. Officials say there's no evidence of a cyber attack. CNN's Nina Dos Santos joins us now live from Heathrow, and she's been probably talking with people and assessing where they are and trying to get back up and in the air. Hi, Nina.
Hi there. Hi, Natalie. I have actually been speaking to some stricken passengers just in the last hour or so, many of them having to spend the nights on sleeping bags issued by British Airways because there were just no hotel rooms, even if the airline wanted to get them into a hotel room. Some of these individuals also went online, tried to book hotel rooms themselves, got to that hotel and then found out that it had been triple booked. Lots of frustration and exasperation among these passengers here. Some of them saying that they were at Heathrow Airport in the terminal, left there without information until 10:30 to 11 at night, after which British Airways representatives rounded them up and helped them to find some kind of sofa to share in some of these hotels and elsewhere. But when it comes to services today, British Airways is saying that Gatwick services are resuming as normal. They're hoping that the majority of services here at Heathrow Airport, the bigger and busiest hub, will be returning to normal. I should tell you that having looked at the departures board, it does look as though there's a lot of green on there, a lot of flights saying that they're on time, but it's for the thousands of people who got stranded yesterday, and also crucially their luggage, which is also in limbo. For them, this is a tense time because they don't know when they're going to be able to get back onto any of these flights, because obviously the people currently booked for these flights today may well take the flights, and then they'll have to try and find something else and make sure that they're not staying in another hotel on a sleeping bag for another night.
Oy vey. I don't know what else to say. And the cause, Nina, was a power supply issue, not cyber attack. Is that something that they've commented on, how that could have happened, or if they'll be able to prevent something like that in the future?
Yeah, at the moment there hasn't been any word about exactly what type of power supply has caused these massive IT failures here for BA. Remember that at one point, you couldn't even get on the website. I've just checked it now, and if you do look for flight status and you're a passenger, you can actually check it now, and that is working. In the last hour, an hour or so ago, it wasn't. But yeah, as you said twice there, Natalie, they've come out and said this hasn't been a cyber attack. It is a power outage. BA said that they're desperately sorry for this. At one point throughout the course of yesterday, they just had to rely upon social media and basically us, the media, to tell passengers what to do and whether their flights were cancelled or not. The departure boards at Heathrow are working. The website of Heathrow is working. So if you're a passenger, go to those kind of websites to try and find out whether your flight is taking off. Do not come to Heathrow Airport or Gatwick. It's still the official word if you don't know whether your flight is confirmed. Back to you.
All right. Very good advice. Nina Dos Santos for us. Thank you.
All right, still ahead here on CNN Newsroom, 2 men killed as they...
Police have identified a location they say may have been where the Manchester bomb was assembled. They've also released 2 still photographs of bomber Salman Abedi. The images were taken by a surveillance camera on the night of the attack. A police statement says investigators think the bomb was put together at a city center apartment.
Thousands of travelers stranded at two of London's busiest airports, all due to a major computer outage. British Airways canceled all flights from Heathrow and Gatwick Saturday after a power supply issue. Not a cyber attack brought down the system. The airline is aiming to operate at a near normal schedule on Sunday.
Senior White House officials are refusing to comment on reports that Jared Kushner wanted to set up secret communications with the Kremlin. Kushner is President Trump's son-in-law and close advisor. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster brushed aside questions from reporters saying the U.S. has back-channel communications with several countries.
And the president says that he will decide in the coming days if the United States will stay in the Paris Climate Accord. At the G7 summit, world leaders pressed Mr. Trump to reaffirm his commitment to the agreement. The president refrained from doing that and did not sign on to a joint statement endorsing the accord when the summit wrapped up.
The FBI is investigating whether a deadly attack on a commuter train in Portland, Oregon is a hate crime. 2 men were stabbed to death and another wounded after eyewitnesses say the suspect started yelling hateful slurs at 2 Muslim women.
Police say the 2 men were killed trying to intervene and calm him down. A professor of one of the victims described him as, quote, a wonderful human being who always asked intelligent questions in class. He also called him a hero. Our Dan Lieberman has more on this attack.
Portland, Oregon police are now identifying the suspect in a brutal stabbing. 35-year-old Jeremy Joseph Christian was booked on murder charges and is being held without bail after allegedly stabbing 3 people on a crowded commuter train during rush hour yesterday. 2 of those victims died.
It's horrific. There's no other word to describe what happened.
Videos show Christian at a rally shouting racist slurs and making Nazi salutes just weeks ago. Witnesses say that's what he was doing on Friday, shouting anti-Muslim and other hateful slurs like,
get out to the country because you don't pay taxes in here, and he doesn't like Muslims because they're like criminals.
Authorities believe the comments were directed towards 2 female passengers, one wearing a hijab. Other passengers intervened, and that's when the violence broke out.
I go to reach out to start pulling people apart, and then I see that there's just blood everywhere. Again, it happened so fast, but it looked like every punch that I saw was actually a stab.
2 men were killed, and police say the suspect fled the train. He was later arrested in a nearby neighborhood.
When he got off the train, I saw he was holding a knife, and then he says, "Don't follow me."
First responders tried to save one victim's life, but he died on the scene. The other victim died at the hospital. The other passenger who was stabbed is expected to survive. 2 others were also injured. Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley responded on Twitter saying, quote, terrible tragedy on Portland's MAX train. Champions of justice risked and lost their lives. Hate is evil. Dan Lieberman, CNN, New York.
Dan, thank you for the reporting. Even as some people in the U.S. experience racism firsthand, they're also pulling out their cell phones. They're starting to record what happens.
Our Polo Sandoval explains why many are posting videos online.
A series of racist rants in public and on camera. A woman in a Virginia Sprint store hurled a racial slur at a fellow customer. In Arkansas,
I said, excuse me. Go back. Where are you from?
Go back to Mexico is what this Walmart shopper told another.
We're in America.
She then fired the N-word at a woman looking to interject.
Stop being ignorant. Calling me ignorant. Oh.
Then there's what Orlando resident Hector Torres captured on his phone at the Reno airport last week.
Come out and shut up! Like that? Shut up! Wow, unbelievable. Mike, that is sad. I just knew I had to document it.
Torres telling CNN he was speaking Spanish to his Puerto Rican mother on the phone when things got heated.
Explain what I did to you one more time.
Talking that stupid Spanish around here when everybody else is English-speaking American.
Racist rants are not new, says Andra Gillespie, director of the Institute for the Study of Race and Difference at Emory University.
These videos remind us that race has been a constant and persistent problem in the United States.
There's been a spike in the number of racist rants posted on social media, experts say.
As technology becomes even more and more mainstream and more people are having smartphone devices and video capability is just going to be exploding more and more.
Recording these kinds of confrontations also may empower people to expose the racism, says Gillespie. There could also be a Trump factor behind it all.
People perhaps feel more emboldened to express politically incorrect points of view as a result of President Trump's success in being able to use political incorrectness as a tool to be able to be elected president. But I think it's important to know that these people held these points of view long before Donald Trump emerged as a political figure.
The videos may be ugly.
Learn how to speak English.
Unbelievable.
We live in America.
But Gillespie calls them a launching point for a larger conversation about race. Polo Sandoval, CNN, Atlanta.
You know, the thing about those videos also, when they're posted and they're there for a long time.
Right. Well, his point was hopefully it will spark some larger conversations about race, and certainly we've got a ways to go in that conversation. Next here on CNN Newsroom, the U.S. president gives a statement of solidarity with the leader of the Philippines, and now parts of that country are under martial law. We'll have a report just ahead.
Plus, Iraqi troops say they are close to taking the rest of Mosul from ISIS. What we know about this latest offensive as CNN Newsroom continues. Say that a large operation started Saturday to retake the last areas in the city's west that remain under ISIS control.
The battle for Mosul began last October, but victory does now appear in sight for Iraqi troops. They say they're pushing towards the old city and appear confident as this fight drags on.
Rapid response forces advanced today into Al-Zinjili district. We managed to break their defenses, and we entered some 500 meters inside the district. Morale is high, and we will keep advancing, and God willing, we will fully recapture the district today or tomorrow.
Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte appears to have put his foot in it again as he tried to reassure soldiers who might be accused of committing abuses under martial law. He jokingly said that if any of them were to rape 3 women, he would personally claim responsibility for it. Mr. Duterte made the remark in a speech to soldiers on Mindanao Island, where he imposed martial law on Tuesday. He is trying to crush ISIS-linked rebels who have invaded the island. U.S. President Donald Trump has released a statement of solidarity with the Philippine president.
And that despite concerns over Mr. Duterte's use of martial law and many other things that he has said. Will Ripley reports.
I have always said, do not force my hand into it.
He's the mastermind of a bloody drug war, has bragged about personally killing people, and this week imposed martial law to fight terrorism. The Philippines' strongman president, Rodrigo Duterte, has even compared himself to Hitler for his quest to exterminate drug criminals. Human rights groups have condemned him. President Trump praised him in what the White House describes as a very friendly phone call last month, saying, "I just want to congratulate you because I'm hearing of the unbelievable job on the drug problem." The leaked transcript obtained by The Intercept, Washington Post, and New York Times. A senior U.S. official briefed on the call verified the basics of the conversation to CNN, adding the president was only acknowledging America's drug problem, not condoning violence and human rights violations. CNN has reported extensively on the Philippines drug war and the thousands killed in its poorest slums, openly encouraged by the government.
I have seen some of those colorful statements in the past.
When former President Obama criticized the bloodshed, Duterte called him a son of a bitch and told him to go to hell. But with Trump, Duterte has a good rapport. Unlike his predecessor, Trump seems largely unconcerned with other countries' human rights and is known to lavish praise on authoritarian leaders. On the Philippine president's home island of Mindanao, empty streets and martial law. Deadly clashes with Islamist militants led Duterte to impose military rule in the southern Philippines, an order he may expand. The Philippine Constitution says martial law should last a maximum of 60 days. Duterte says it could go on for a year. From the White House Thursday, a statement of solidarity and a promise the U.S. will continue to provide support and assistance to Philippine counterterrorism efforts. Will Ripley, CNN.
Alrighty then, let's just move on to the weather, shall we? Sri Lanka experiencing terrible monsoon flooding.
Derek Van Dam here to tell us about it. Derek?
Yeah, there's a few different areas of the world that are receiving flooding, Sri Lanka being one of them, and right here across the central U.S. as well. We're following a flash flood situation in Branson, Missouri. We're going to go to some of the damage because this is part of a larger storm system that spawned off tornadoes as well. But currently there are 3 missing from this flooding in Missouri. And again, this is in southwestern sections of the state. The city experienced significant rainfall in the overnight period, and it forced dozens of water rescues within the city. In fact, Lake Tenicomo has risen almost 4 feet in a short period of time. Table Rock Dam releasing 20,000 metric feet of water per minute. Check this out. This is the latest warnings across the state. Here's Missouri, just south of Springfield. That's the area that we're focusing our attention on right now because that is an area that has seen a significant amount of rain in a short period of time. We saw thunderstorms start to flare up over Branson. Again, that was late Saturday evening and into the early overnight hours. Observed rainfall within the past 12 hours has indicated anywhere between 4 to 6, perhaps even 7 inches of rain. And that has caused the flooding and the swift water rescues that are underway as we speak. Now, it's interesting to note that this is coming off an extremely active severe weather day, this being the 27th of May on Saturday, but really it's not the tornadic event that caused the problems. It's been the wind and the hail damage, as you can see them just littered across the Ohio and Tennessee River Valley stretching towards the Ozarks. That's where we've had the bulk of our severe weather. We still have ongoing severe threat at the moment, but as we head into the day on Sunday, this is where we're focusing our attention. Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and into Alabama, southern Michigan, all the way to the mid-Atlantic states. A slight risk of severe storms as these continue to march eastward. Let's bring you to Sri Lanka. A quick update on the latest situation there. Roll some of the footage and you'll see the extreme flooding that they are also contending with. We have, unfortunately, a higher death toll from this latest round of flooding. It stands at 113, still 91 people missing. The good news here, George, Natalie, is that aid is now arriving in Sri Lanka from international United Nations aid agencies, and wow, they need it because it's going to be several days, if not weeks, as a cleanup effort with the rains.
Those pictures there really tell the story.
Yeah, it really does.
Derek, thank you.
Thanks, George.
Still ahead here on Newsroom, words of regret from a Donald Trump voter.
He played me for a fool. I mean, I kind of took it personal.
Why some of the president's biggest supporters are now losing.
Welcome back to CNN Newsroom. Greg Allman, the legendary co-founder of the Allman Brothers Band, died Saturday. He was 69 years old, battling cancer.
As one of his hits, Allman had numerous hits, of course, during his nearly 50-year career, including Midnight Rider and Ramblin' Man. His band featured a uniquely American sound that became known as Southern rock.
Allman was working on a new album at the time of his death.
Donald Trump's budget proposal cuts millions of dollars from social programs, even though many of those programs benefit people who voted for it.
And now some of the people in the country's poorest areas say if the election were held today, well, they might change their votes. Gary Tuckman has this report.
Wesley Easterling and his 2-year-old daughter Riley live in the heart of Appalachia, Elliott County, Kentucky.
I voted for Donald Trump.
Which is noteworthy because Donald Trump is the first Republican presidential candidate he has ever voted for. Elliott County was founded in 1869. There have been 37 presidential elections since then. Remarkably, in this county, the Democratic candidate has won every one of those elections until this one. And Donald Trump won big here, getting more than 70% of the vote. Many people like Wesley Easterling believing
he had a lot of amazing ideas. He just had this charisma about him. He was something different.
This county is one of the poorest ones in the country. The poverty rate is over 34%, and it has one of the highest percentages of people in the nation who rely on federal benefit programs. And Wesley Easterling is one of them. He and his family have benefited from Medicaid and food stamps. During the presidential campaign, he took candidate Trump at his word.
Save Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security without cuts. Have to do it.
When he said that he wasn't going to cut Medicaid or, the benefits, I believe that.
But the proposed new health care plan and the proposed federal budget cut hundreds of millions of dollars a year from Medicaid. The budget also makes cuts in programs ranging from food stamps to Social Security disability insurance.
I mean, I felt just like I was insulted, just like he played me for a fool. I mean, I kind of took it personal.
If you could do it over again, if Election Day were today, who would you vote for?
Hillary, without a doubt.
Inside Elliott County's Penny Mart, we talked with other Trump voters, like bluegrass musician Sammy Atkins. If the election were held today, who would you vote for?
Well, I probably have to wait and see a little bit more into in his office, I mean, if he does a lot of cutting stuff, I'm sure it might go the other way,
But Trump voter Tim Fannin says he would enthusiastically cast his ballot for Donald Trump again. So what do you say to other people in this county who are upset about these federal programs possibly being cut?
Tough luck. I mean, you have to nip it in the bud, as Barney Fife says. You got to nip it in the bud, and you got to start somewhere.
Wesley Easterling just graduated from a pipe welding program at a community college and hopes to get a refinery job soon so he can be off federal assistance. Donald Trump, during the campaign, said he's going to fight for the little guy. You're the little guy, right?
I am the little guy.
Do you feel he's fighting for you?
No, not at all. The little guy's going to have to fight for himself.
In the meantime, he says he is praying for his family, his country, and his president. Gary Tuckman, CNN, Elliott County, Kentucky.
And that is our first hour of CNN Newsroom. I'm Natalie Allen.
And I'm George Howell. The news continues here on CNN right after the break.